I wanted to talk a little bit about the perspective from south of the border, because our political parties look like they're broken. Our political system looks like it doesn't work. And this is not an unnormal occurrence in American politics. We go through this periodically with much more regularity than Americans seem to think they do. But this one's interesting because of a couple of things. First of all, like I suspect you in Canada and certainly Europe, we're going through a populist moment. In fact, we may have set this all in motion. It's not to say that populism is necessarily bad. If you look in the modern era, there's been no successful conservative president elected without a little bit of populism in his message. A little antagonism towards big government, concern about the power of the elites, particularly those in the media and the academic world. And so it's always been there, but it hasn't been the dominant element. But in the last, say, dozen years, it has become such. Part of it was that the institutions of government came into a greater level of distrust with the Iraq War. I'm proud to have served in the Bush administration. I think it was the right thing to do, but I have to acknowledge that it divided the American people and caused trust in our levels of institutions of government to decline. But the big thing, the proximate cause, was the financial crisis of 2008, which caused right-wing populism and left-wing populism to emerge in America. And it's interesting because populism is not necessarily a well-developed, coherent ideology, but it has some shared elements of sentiment. And we saw it on the left and right. The right populists said, you know, the relationship between the government and the ordinary man and woman has been wrecked because they took money out of my pocket to give to the big banks and bail them out. And on the left, they had a similar attitude, which was the relationship between the government and the ordinary individual had been wrecked because the big boys got bailed out and the little man didn't. And both left and right populists felt like they had a bone to pick with the institutions of government and the political parties in charge. You saw it play out on the right during the Obama years. I actually got to know Senator Obama pretty well. I was in the senior White House staff, and a dirty little secret is that the 12 or 13 or 14 senior members of the White House staff, they're called assistants to the president, all get an assignment. Here are the members of the House of Representatives who are big players, who you need to develop a relationship with, and here are the members of the Senate for whom you're responsible to be the point of contact, so that if one of the 100 senators or the 60 or so significant figures in the House want to call the president, they don't have to call him, they can call you. So after the 2004 election, they handed out a list of the people who needed to have somebody be their point of contact, the new members of the Senate, and a couple of days later they came back to me and said, Senator Obama is yours. I said, well, why? I'm not from Illinois. I don't know him. They said, nobody does. But your former deputy helped get him elected, was his Harvard Law School classmate, and helped get him elected to the Harvard Law Review editorship. So it's up to you to develop a relationship with him. So I got to know him. And when he said, I don't want to be the president of red states or blue states, but the United States, I said, I hope that's right, because the country needed a unifier, but he wasn't a unifier. Key moment came in early February of 2009 when the Republicans in the House trooped down to the White House to make some suggestions regarding the so-called stimulus bill, and President Obama cut him off by saying, I won. Well, he did. But that carried with it the responsibility to try and draw the country together and saying, I'm not going to listen to you. I got better ideas than you do, and I won, and you're not really important. Set a bad tone for the rest of the time that he had in office. One of his key advisors that following October, I had dinner with him. He said, I'm mystified as to why we didn't get more votes from the Republicans for the stimulus bill. I said, well, did you ever listen to their ideas? Did you ever contemplate shifting out some of your ideas for their ideas? Did you ever go up to the Hill and ask them their ideas? He said, no, we had the right ideas. I said, well, if you don't give people a seat at the table, don't expect them to vote for your plan. But that continued to grow. Obamacare passed by a straight party line vote. And the pace of change. America looked suddenly like it was going to be changing so fast and so dramatically that what it had been and what people had grown up in was no longer going to be around. And we saw this emerge in American politics in 2010 with this huge Huge win by the Republicans in the House of Representative races. But it grew and it grew and it grew. And by 2015 and 16, there was an element inside the conservative movement, inside the Republican Party, that no longer cared about where you were on the issues. All they wanted to know was that you would take a brick and throw it through the plate glass window. And that's exactly what happened in the nomination of Donald J. Trump. But let's not kid ourselves. It was also there on the left. I want you to think about it. Now, look, I know you're close to Vermont from here. Look, I live in Texas. We have counties, and we have 254 counties in Texas. We got counties that are bigger than the state of Vermont. We got ranch roads that are longer than the longest freeway they got in that dinky little state. But I want you to think about this. Bernie Sanders ran for the state legislature, was defeated, was elected mayor of Burlington, ran for the governorship and was defeated, got elected to the U.S. House and got elected to the U.S. Senate twice, and in each and every one of those races, he either defeated or was defeated by a Republican and a Democrat, because he never ran for office as a Democrat. The first Democratic convention of any kind that he ever attended was the Philadelphia Democratic National Convention in 2016. He was an independent, self-described Democratic socialist, and he gave Hillary Clinton, the heir apparent to Barack Obama, the former First Lady of the United States, the political spouse of William Jefferson Clinton, two-time U.S. Senator from New York and Secretary of State of the United States of America. That little guy gave her a hell of a run. He raised $230 million without attending a single fundraising event. That's unheard of in American politics. All he had to do was send out an email or a tweet, and in would come the contributions, proving that there is a fundamental flaw in the American financial system, that so many left-wingers have credit cards. We got to worry about this. But he has that spirit of left populism has grown in America, and the problem is the right populism is, okay, make some changes to rebalance the relationship and then get the heck out of my life. But left-wing populism says the answer is in government, and therefore what we need is more government, which begets more government, which begets more government. And of course, as we all know, in Bernie's mind, it's all free. And we're dealing with that in the United States. I want to return to that in just a minute. We're dealing with something else, maybe familiar to you here in Canada, and that is identity politics. Not so familiar in the United States. But we now are dealing with identity politics based on three principles. One, only members of your group can truly represent you. Two, members of your group must always think alike. You can't deviate from what we determine to be groupthink. And third, the perceived grievances of your group and the groups to which you belong are layered on top of each other. You're a person of color. You're a woman. You're LGBT. All of those sort of can be looped up on top of each other, layered on top of each other, and politics becomes grievance and resentment. What are you going to do to take all of my grievances and deal with them? Now, conservatives, we got a little bit of a problem because, first of all, we do have a responsibility in a democracy. Public opinion matters. And people are comfortable. Norwegian Americans are more comfortable voting for Norwegian Americans. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of us in America, so therefore there are not a lot of us in American politics. But we have this tension between wanting to make certain that our political movements look like the rest of the country or the state or province in which we live, and the fact that we're conservatives. Because conservatives do believe that we have universal values and universal principles that are good for all people regardless of who you are. We believe in timeless things like freedom and liberty and personal responsibility and markets. And we don't believe that demography is destiny. We believe that ideas are the decisive element expressed by strong and effective leaders. But we're grappling with this in America because, for example, in the recent congressional elections, for a variety of reasons, the number of women Republicans in the House of Representatives declined dramatically. And we can't, as a country, as a conservative movement, effectively govern the country unless we look more like the country itself. Finally, we're facing in the United States the inevitable in politics, change. Now, change is not necessarily bad. When I moved to Texas, which today is a big red state, out of the 150 members of the Texas House of Representatives, we had reached an all-time high. Since the end of Republican rule and Reconstruction, we had built our way back to holding, out of 150 seats, 13. We had had a fantastic election in the Texas State Senate, 31 members, and we had, in one election alone, increased our numbers by 50%. We'd gone from 2 to 3. Walter Mad Dog Mingdon of Houston and O.H. Ike Harris of Dallas had been joined by Betty Andahar of Fort Worth. And we'd had a brief period of time during which we had not elected a Republican statewide elected official in our state capital. 114 years. Do you know when that was? 1977. And today we are a big red state. So change is not necessarily wrong or bad, but we are going through change. We're being helped by the movement of some non-traditional voters into our party. Now, the myth is that these are blue-collar, working-class people who got a high school education. In reality, it's a little bit more complex than that. We got roughly the same percentage in the last presidential election of blue-collar, high school-educated people that we gotten before. But where we made a really big, dramatic jump is among people who have some college education. And I think there's a big difference between somebody who's got only high school and somebody who's got some college. The person who's got some college is generally, in my opinion, more likely to be a small businessman or small businesswoman. They tend to be people who live not just in rural America or industrial centers, but live in small towns. They're the go-getters. They're the people who are part of the local community clubs. They're the people who are presidents of their PTAs. They're the people who want to do something bigger and better in their life for their family. And they used to be Democrats, and they're moving into the Republican ranks. On the other hand, we're being hurt by the movement of college-educated suburbanites, especially women, away. They voted overwhelmingly for Mitt Romney and John McCain, and before them, George W. Bush in this century, but they didn't vote for Donald J. Trump. Not because they necessarily disagreed with his policies, but they didn't like the tweeting, and they didn't like the coarseness, and they didn't like the personality, and they didn't like the background. But enough of them stayed with us in 2016 because as bad as they thought he was, they disliked her even more. 1 out of every 6 voters in the 2016 presidential election said that they thought neither person running was qualified to be president. The next biggest election number for that category was 3%. And the people who thought that neither one was qualified voted for him, better than her by better than 2 to 1. But they gave us a drubbing in 2018 because they said, I want to send a message. I may have liked the tax reform. I may have liked the conservative judges. I may have liked the regulatory relief. I may have liked the fact that he's strong on the international stage again. But I want to send a message, and there's only one way for me to send a message, and that's to kick out a suburban Republican congressman and give the House of Representatives over to him. Now, I think all of these things sort of tie together in an imperative for the conservative movement in my country, and I suspect the conservative movement in your country as well, and that is we got to take the proposals of the opposition seriously. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes around and says Green New Deal, and when Bernie says free college, and Kamala Harris says, Medicare for all, and somebody says we need to, Robert Francis O'Rourke says we need to have a guaranteed federal job, and several of them say we need to have the universal basic income. We need to take these proposals seriously. We can't mock them. We can't dismiss them with a cute phrase. We've got to take them on and explain to the American people why they're bad policy, why they're not in keeping with the values of our state or our country. And finally, we've got to go out there and begin to describe, which is hard for conservatives in my country to do, what it is that we do as an alternative, particularly when it comes to health care. People say the system is broken. So I grant you, I don't want the federal government to take it over. I don't want to have the lines and the waiting. I don't want to lose my family's private insurance coverage. But what are you going to do to make it better? And I think this is critical to our movement in the United States. And I think it's critical to the reinvigoration of the conservative movement worldwide. We need to recognize that while we have timeless principles, one of the reasons that we've lost power is there's a natural tendency, after people have been in office for a period of time, for people to say, I want change. And when that moment comes that we get tossed out of power, we got to figure out how to take our principles, which are timeless in nature, and apply them to the new circumstances in which our countries find themselves. And if we can do that, we'll regain power. And when we do, it won't simply be to hold it, it will be to do something with it. The United States is in a period of political instability. No ifs, ands, or buts. I suspect you've gleaned that even north of the border. I can assure you, however, that if the United States government begins to discuss building a beautiful wall, the entire range along our northern border from the Maritimes to BC, that we will be against it. Mainly because you're too polite to come across the border without permission and prior approval. One of the great things we can count on our Canadian friends is that you will be polite and kind and gentle and respectful of the laws and rules of order. I'm worried a little bit about you as a national security concern when it comes to steel, but I'm still trying to get my hands around all that. I'm not certain I necessarily agree with the policy of the government, but maybe they know something about you that I don't know about that maybe you will reveal to me here today. But we're in a period of instability, and the conservative movement has always been the movement that in these moments of instability, whether it's the French Revolution or the American Civil War or the 1970s with a period of malaise, in the United States and elsewhere, it's been the conservative party that has stepped up and governed again. Thanks for having me here, and I look forward to answering or ducking your questions.
Okay, well, you have a chance to use your app to send us questions here, so please do that. And meanwhile, maybe, Karl, I'll start in Canada, and I imagine this is true in the United States. There is an increasing amount of disillusionment with parties, with leaders, and it's even becoming a disillusionment with democracy itself, particularly among the younger people. And one of the most frequent reasons given for that disillusionment is the ethical tone of politics. Right. And I wonder if in your experience you could say what can be done to raise the ethical tone. You've got these people that say, well, they're all cheats, they're all liars, they're all this. Yeah. What can be done to raise the ethical tone of the political? Yeah,
look, the problem with democracy is democracy. You know, the only way to raise the ethical tone of political parties and political institutions is for the voters to demand it. And it needs to start within our parties. Time and time again, I've seen this where people who act in an unethical manner seem to survive and survive and survive. But ultimately, as you say, it grows. And this is one of the reasons why in safe states, in safe constituencies, the governing party gets kicked out. It's generally because they've either run out of ideas or more often because they've become corrupt. So I think it's not an easy answer because I think it starts with I like strong political parties. I like political parties where the grassroots constituency is strong and engaged and demands of its leaders adherence to high standards. And if we don't have that, particularly in places that are, that we dominate, we're going to eventually do long-term damage to ourselves. Better to say, time to, thank you for your service, but we can do better and replace them in primaries or however. I mean, how do you politely ask somebody to hit the road in Canada? We just kick their ass out in Texas.
And in the recruitment of Republican candidates, for example, how high on the recruitment list is character itself? Like we look at, can the person communicate? Can the person have something substantive to say on the issues? But how high is character?
Well, it ought to be high. Because ultimately, look, when the voters are looking at you, particularly the bigger the contest, whether it's president or governor or senator, maybe to a lesser extent member of Congress. But the higher the office, the more it's like, you know, we have these movies like, you know, Robert Redford, The Candidate, and, you know, others that sort of depict this process as, you know, we're going to come up with a clever ad and we're going to fool the people. But the higher the profile of the race, the more it's like the emperor's new clothes. And they're going to see you at the end of the parade exactly as you are. And the question is, are you looking like you're on your best day? And do they say, compared to that other person, I want you? And so character matters a lot. I'm involved in a super PAC, and I know these numbers sort of absolutely are incomprehensible to Canadians, but the American Crossroads Senate Leadership Fund, we spent $195 million last time around. And we started in 2010. We raised $72 million our first election cycle. We started in April of 2010, raised $72 million. 2012 we were out. We raised about $100 and some odd million for Senate races. And we always took whom the party nominated. So we were there to help the candidates in the general election. But in 2010, we would go in and we spent money in Colorado for a nice guy named Ken Buck, but not the best candidate. We spent money in Nevada for a woman named Sharon Angle who against Harry Reid came this close to beating him, but she was a terrible candidate. 2012, we'd spent some money in Missouri dusting up Claire McCaskill, $3 million, before the primaries. This is in the early part of 2012. And she went in and helped nominate the worst Republican to run against her. She attacked him. She ran television advertising saying, Todd Akin is too conservative for Missouri. He's never voted for a tax increase. He's always been pro-life. He even supports a balanced budget amendment. Todd Akin, too conservative for Missouri. She knew exactly what she was doing. And he then proceeded to embarrass us because he lacked character. He lacked the ability to connect with people, to understand, be sensitive to people. So after the election, our donors said to us, look, we're happy to continue writing checks for you, but for God's sake, get involved in primaries. And so starting in 2014, we got involved in primaries. And what we found out was that character mattered a lot. And if you picked the candidate with the right character and backed him, you not only generally won, in fact, we won every single time in the primaries, but you had a much better chance of winning in the general election. Give you two examples. North Carolina, like a 5-person race. We backed a guy who grew up in a trailer park, Tom Tillis. Guy literally grew up in a trailer park. Graduated from high school, couldn't afford to go to college. Started working as a warehouseman in a tech firm, and decided, and was a short order to cook on the weekend. Got married, started a family. In his early 20s, he said, you know, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this. So he talked his way into the accounting department of the firm. And a couple years later, their outside auditor and tax preparer, PricewaterhouseCoopers, said, this kid may not have a degree, but he is really smart. Let's hire him and put him in our training program. And he became a full partner of PwC 2 years before he got his college degree. Did a spectacular job working for him. Decided that, you know, he lived outside of Charlotte. He was a turnaround specialist for PwC. He decided he wanted to get involved in politics. Had never done anything politically. He'd been president of his high school, of his kids' high school PTA. There was a Republican legislator in his neighborhood. Guy was a good guy, and he could vote right, but he had no leadership. He sort of went up to Raleigh, North Carolina, the state capital, and said, tell me how to vote. So Tillis runs against him in the primary. And the two of them campaigned together because he never attacks his opponent. He says, if you send me to Raleigh, here's what I'm going to go to work on. I think we need to reform our education system. I think we need to reform our government with tough ethics legislation. We need to reduce the regulatory burden and taxes on business. Specific ideas about what he was going to do. And here's why I want to do it, because I'm a conservative. Beats the guy 2-1 in the primary, never attacked him. Goes to the legislature. They say, oh, wonderful young freshman member. Congratulations. When we tell you to get coffee and donuts, do it for us, will you? And oh, incidentally, because you're a smart freshman guy, you're in charge of the North Carolina Republican House Campaign Committee. Last time we had the majority was in 1874. So good luck with that. And, you know, tell us how it goes after the election. Well, he's a turnaround specialist. So the guy has one of those goofy charts like the chart you had up there. I was afraid you were going to give us homework assignments. You know, homework assignments are coming from Preston. Anyway, but he makes up a chart that says, okay, we need to pick up 12 seats. There are 22 that we could win. Here's the kind of person we need to run in each seat. Let's go recruit the right candidate. If they will do this, if they'll walk this many doors, we'll reward them with this amount of money. Let's go to raising the money to do that. Here's what you need to do in order to win. Here are the charts, like your little chart. Here's what you need to do by win in order to do it. And they don't win 12. They win 16. And he becomes the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And that's the kind of guy that we wanted, somebody with great integrity, somebody who has great values, somebody who can articulate our conservative message, and somebody like the magic word you said at the beginning, action. None of this is about dialogue. We can talk von Mises and Hayek all day long. But Adam Smith, I've just finished that fantastic new biography of Adam Smith by Jesse Norman. I strongly recommend it to you. But don't let it keep you from block walking. Because at the end of the day, all these wonderful ideas matter for naught unless we translate them into effective action.
Well, that's a great story, and it's encouraging. Now, there's a couple of questions here. One is this, you mentioned the populist phenomena. Is this a blip that will correct itself in the next few years, or is this becoming a dominant characteristic of the politics, not only of the United States, but other parts of the world?
Well, I think you got to make a different case for Europe than North America. Look, a lot of the institutions in places like Italy are corrupt. And populism is in part a large reaction to the distance between the elites and the ordinary people, and many times that is expressed in corruption. Okay. Even in market economies, you know, not to refer back to my Adam Smith biography, but one of the things that really is good in Norman's biography is he shows the emphasis that Adam Smith put on crony capitalism. So I don't think it's necessarily going to go away in Europe quickly, wherever there's corruption. And wherever there's deep concern about immigration, like Germany or the Nordics. I think in the United States, it's always there. So it's not a question of it's here today and it's going to go to here, because it's always been sort of, within the conservative movement, sort of here. Inside the Democratic movement, it's been less so. But I think it's going to remain more in the Democratic in the Democratic Party, because it's left populism so easily lends itself to an antagonism towards the institutions of a free market. And so I think we're likely to see it remain more prevalent in the Democratic side in the foreseeable future.
Here's a question. Is Trump likely to get a second term?
Well, look, he can, but I think they're realistic. They know they're in for a tough race. He cannot afford to lose Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Can't afford to lose all three. He's got to win 2 out of the 3. Otherwise, he's got difficulty. And he can't lose anything else. Can't lose a Florida. Can't lose a Georgia. Can't lose. He's got to be okay in Ohio, because it's turning redder and redder. But I think they're realistic enough to realize that they won last time around. He got 46% of the popular vote. She got 48, and he ran, he ran the straight flush. He got Wisconsin by 22,000 votes, and there are about 35,000 fewer votes cast in the black wards of Milwaukee. He wins Michigan by 11,000 votes. There are 25,000 fewer votes in the city of Detroit. He wins Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes. There are 65 to 70,000 fewer votes in the wards of Philadelphia, which went for Barack Obama 88-8. So he got to worry about it.
It can be done, though. Well,
it can be done. And you know what? He's going to use a strategy pioneered before by Barack Obama. I want you to think about this. Trump is at 38% reelect. Obama at the same point was 43. Now there's a difference, because the people who are against Trump are a lot more hard over than the people who are against Obama. But Obama did 3 things. One is he sort of started saying after the 2010 elections, we need to have unity and find common purpose. Let us work together. And you'll notice that Trump wisely did that in his State of the Union address. He said, let's find areas of common agreement. The second thing that Obama did was he found a little bit of something new, policy. Now, he waited until the summer of 2012 and did DACA, the Solution for Dreamers. After saying for 3 years, I don't have the authority to do it, suddenly he found, and he didn't have the authority to do it, suddenly he found the authority to do it in the middle of the election when he was worried about Latino enthusiasm. Trump didn't wait. He did, again, wisely did it in the State of the Union address. Let's find something that helps me with suburban voters, particularly women. He says, we need to have a dialogue about paid family leave, Ivanka's proposal. Those are the two minor parts of the strategy. The main part of the strategy for Barack Obama was to spend 2012 disqualifying Mitt Romney in the minds of Americans as somebody worthy of holding the Oval Office. And he did it quite effectively. That was the plutocrat who was out of touch with you. And the president began to lay the predicate for 2020 in the State of the Union address by saying we've never been and never will be a socialist country. I think he's counting on having an opponent that he can say, really? Free what, Bernie? Free college? Free health care? You know, guaranteed job? Guaranteed wage? You know, really? How are we going to, Green New Deal? People can't fly in airplanes, got to get rid of your gasoline-powered car in 10 years? Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Okay. What about the Mueller report? It was submitted today to the Attorney General. Yeah. What do you think is going to be the outcome of that?
Well, I've been in the minority of my party on this. I know Bob Mueller. He's a really good man, and he's a straight arrow. And I also had a sense of this. Look, every campaign leaks. Every presidential campaign in the United States, you know, leaks. No campaign, in my experience, has leaked worse than the Donald Trump campaign. 2016 was like, you wanted to know who had gone to the restroom at 11 o'clock in the morning, somebody would leak it. So if there was collusion, we know about it.
Literally.
Yeah, we know about it. And Mueller is a straight arrow. And yeah, he comes across crooks. You know, the guy wanted to bring $16 million in illicit gains back from Ukraine to the United States without paying taxes. I really don't have much sympathy for a guy who wants to do that. I pay my taxes. He should have paid his. But my sense is that if there had been collusion, we would have known about it. And so my view all along has been, I think Trey Gowdy, Congressman Trey Gowdy was right. He was on Fox News Sunday one weekend, and he was directing his comments at Rudy Giuliani, but he was really directing him at the president. He said, my advice to Mr. Giuliani is, to Mayor Giuliani is, if your client is innocent, then act like you're innocent. Stop attacking the Mueller investigation. And I think the president is going to be well served if, as I think it's going to appear, they're going to say, well, they've already said tonight, no further indictments. So there's no last-minute surprise. So he's now turned in this report. It's confidential under U.S. law. The Attorney General now has to look at it. He then, it's up to him to make public what he thinks ought to be made public. I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal 3 or 4 weeks ago. There are two things that he has to report. Mueller has to report to the Attorney General the background on the indictments. And he can literally say the indictments speak for themselves. Because when he put out those indictments, they were voluminous. He put it all in there. And he could say, I have nothing additional to add to my decisions to indict. And on the declinations, he could literally say, here are the issues that we looked into. Or he could say, here are the issues we looked into and the individuals that we treated as objects of this. I don't know which one he's done, but it could be that, and I think it ought to be, that the Attorney General of the United States says, either here are the issues that he looked into and decided to take no action, or nothing at all when it comes to the declinations. Again, I'm in the minority of my party. I thought one of the worst things that Jim Comey did two really bad things in the spring of 2016. First of all, under U.S. law, he had no authority whatsoever to make the decision not to indict Hillary Clinton. That was not his. He's the director of the FBI. I don't know how it is in Canada, but since the founding of our country, and since we sent all those loyalists north to take care of the Maritimes for you, we have separated the police power, the power to investigate, from the prosecutorial decisions. How many of you watch Law and Order? Ding, ding, two separate branches, the police who investigate the crimes and the prosecutors. All right, so we've done that. He's the head of the FBI. His job is to investigate and to make what's called a referral to the Maine Justice Department. Now, he decided not to. Why? Because the Attorney General of the United States was compromised by having met with William Jefferson Clinton on the tarmac in Phoenix. Well, fine, but that's not enough. He should have referred it to the Justice Department. She should have said, I have to recuse myself, and it would have been up to her deputy. But no, he decides. That's not his right. The second thing is, having decided not to charge her, whose right was it to say, let me tell you all the bad things she did. She was mishandled this stuff. She was careless. She was reckless. She didn't show proper regard, blah, 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 blah. Do we really want our prosecutors to do that? No, we're not going to charge Preston. But let me tell you what a slob he is. Really, seriously. Let me go on for about a half an hour in a national news conference and tell you how terrible he is. But I'm not going to indict him. Do we really want that in our society? Yeah. And so I don't want to know who the people are that they decided not to look into. And that they said, you know what, they didn't do anything wrong. I really don't.
And so you don't think Mueller will hurt Trump, depending on how Trump reacts?
I think it depends on how Trump, I think it's all dependent upon how Trump reacts. Yeah. I wanted him to be strong. I wanted him to say, you know what, Mueller's going to get to the bottom of this. We want to know what the Russians did to interfere in our elections, and by God, we're not going to let it happen again. And then focus on other things. Look, our economy is going like to beat the band. We got low unemployment. We got wages growing faster than the economy. We got more job openings than we got job seekers. We got the lowest unemployment rates for African Americans since we began keeping the records by race in 1948. We got the lowest Latino unemployment rate since we began keeping records based on Latino heritage. And we got an economy. I love all these idiots who served in the previous administration who said, oh, no, conservative economics will never deliver 3% growth. It's never going to happen. All those smart people, oh, no, that's a fairy tale, not going to happen. Well, welcome to fairy tale land, because it's happening. But I want the president to be talking about that, not wasting his valuable microphone and his valuable time saying, you know, Bob Mueller, you know, spending millions of dollars investigating a witch hunt. No, have confidence, exude confidence. The president's approval rating is 41 in the Real Clear Politics average. His approval rating on the economy is in the low 50s. If he devoted more time to talking about the economy and what comes next on the economy, then the overall approval rating would be higher and the approval on the economy would be higher. People respond to what you talk about.
Well, maybe one more question, because we've got a reception planned, and many of you will have a chance to meet Karl personally and maybe even put your questions to him then. But maybe one last question more on the international front. One of the things I worry about is that I think the big ideological contest in the 21st century is going to be citizen-directed democracy in the Western tradition versus state-directed democracy and governance as advocated by the Communist Party and government of China, and market-driven capitalism in the sense that conservatives would understand it versus state-directed capitalism in the way it is being practiced by China. And it seems to me, if one is honest, right now those guys are making yards all over the world, Africa, South America, Asia. What do you think can be done? And the United States is a leader in this area. What can be done to strengthen citizen-directed democracy and market-driven capitalism in the face of that kind of competition?
Yeah. Well, I'd add. I think you expressed it well. I'd add Russia into that. Okay. Because I do think Russia is on the wrong side of both of those equations. Yeah. And they're more aggressive in Europe, and the Chinese are more aggressive in the third world, or what we used to call the third world, the developing world. And so, yeah, I agree. First of all, America must remain involved in the world. And this is, I worry about, I understand the president's concern about being in places like Afghanistan and Syria, but if we're not involved, the rest of the world ain't going to take it seriously. And so there needs to be American leadership. And sometimes that requires us to remain in places that we don't want to remain. But think about this. Think about what the world would look like if in about 1955 we said, you know what? We've been in Europe for a decade. Let's bring our boys and girls home. You know, they can take care of themselves. Would the world look like it looks today? What about 57, 58? We'd said, you know, we've been in Korea for a while. That's an armistice, 38th parallel. Come on, we're going home. Does anybody think that Asia would look like it looks today I mean, remember, the north of Korea was the dynamic industrial part of the country. The south of Korea were where the poor, ignorant peasants were. And think about how big what a market economy has done for Korea and what it's done for prosperity around the world. So first and foremost, American leadership. Second of all, and again, I understand the frustrations. Look, I sat in the White House for 7 years. I know how frustrated we could get about NATO and about the unwillingness of America's allies to carry their fair share. But we need to have, America is stronger and the world is better off when America plays a role in providing leadership for alliances. We're better off when we're knit up with our friends and allies, with people with whom we have a common shared value of markets and democracy and liberty and personal responsibility and freedom. And it's really vital. Third, we're better off when we take the lead in trade, when we take the leadership role in making certain that everybody plays by the same rules. I'm not naive to think that the Chinese are playing by the same rules. But we're better off when we say, here are the international trading norms, and by God, you better live up to them. And the president's doing, I think, you know, the update of NAFTA, I hate to say the name, USMCA, you know, because I start thinking of the village people, you know, IMCA. But particularly with China, you know, I'm hoping. They actually filed a very good action at the WTO in March. Nobody's paid much attention to it, to challenge the Chinese from top to bottom on their intellectual property rights practices. And this is a forum where we ought to A, win, and B, we will win by rallying the rest of the world to join with us in it. But we've got to also think about taking our practices and applying our conservative instincts to, you know, look, one of my favorite conservatives is Schumpeter, because free markets disrupt. And we need to think about how we can unleash the power of free markets to confront the Chinese and to keep the high ground on technologically, and how we can demonstrate to people that it is better to have a free market and a market economy than to be one that's dependent upon cheap Chinese money. And we're already starting to see this, where they will go into these countries and on the Belt and Road, they say, oh, we'll give you this money for, you know, 0 interest for 30 years, or we'll give it to you for 1% and then indebt them. But it's going to take American leadership to confront it. And I want this president to confront him. He's capable, he understands the Chinese. He understands the threat to us economically from them. And leadership, but that leadership has got to be leadership of the world. Not to dwell on it, but look, I used to think, oh, God, you know, we are, you know, America's the indispensable country, but we're not that indispensable. In 2002 and 3, Condi Rice went to President Bush and said, we face a problem with AIDS in Africa. We have a continent melting down. We have millions of people who are at risk of losing their lives. And this is a huge geopolitical problem for us, because the more the continent faces this threat, the more unstable it's going to become, and we will see enormous consequences that will affect us. The growth of Islamic extremism will be enhanced. The food issues, the drought issues, the hunger issues, these are all going to be made much worse by a continent that is falling apart because people are dying, when it is within our ability to solve it by delivering antiretroviral drugs to these hot spots of AIDS and doing something about it. So the president goes to the G8. And of course, when you go to the G8, these meetings are scripted well in advance. The guys and gals who work out the agendas and arrange for the resolution of these issues, they've got the coolest title in government, Sherpas. Because we're going to a summit, and they're the Sherpas. and they're going to get us there. So nothing is a surprise. So we go to the first G8 about this. I think it was in Switzerland, or maybe it was in France on the Swiss border. Yeah, that was it. It was in France on the Swiss border. So lovely mountain scene, and Bush shows up and says, we need to do something about AIDS in Africa. And of course, they were ready for him. Oh, Mr. President, thank you for bringing this issue up. This is fantastic for you to bring this up. He says, we need to do something, and we'll put up half the money. Oh, no, Mr. President, no, no, no. Here's what we propose. We will have the Global AIDS Fund, and we will set it up in Geneva, which has nice restaurants. And we will give everybody in the world an allocation. Nice of you to offer half the money, but we really need to allocate it around to everyone. And then when we have raised half of the money necessary for the Global AIDS Fund budget, then we will begin activity. But thank you, little man from Midland, Texas. Let us pat you on the head and tell you you're not very sophisticated, but this is how we will do it. A year later, we go back. 2 countries have met their obligation to the Global AIDS Fund, the United States of America and Finland. And Bush said, screw it, we're moving. We're going to pass the PEPFAR, President's Emergency Relief Program for AIDS and Malaria in Africa, and we're going to commit the energy and treasure of the United States to doing this. And when we did, we led. And a year later, all of a sudden, people started putting their money into the Global AIDS Fund, and the Global AIDS Fund started to say, what can we do to help? But it took somebody saying, the United States is going to lead, and if you'll follow us, great. But if you aren't, we're going to confront this evil. I was in Abuja, Nigeria not too long ago. Guy comes up to me and he says, I'm the governor of the something or other region in the Delta. He said, do you know what the most popular, and we participate in PEPFAR. He said, do you know what the most popular names for infant boys and girls are in my region of Nigeria? I said, I have no idea. He said, George and Laura. First time Bush went to Africa after he left office, he said, oh, I'm not very popular, but I'm going to still be involved in AIDS. So I'm going to go to Uganda and spend a week painting and repairing an AIDS hospice in Uganda. And he thought, well, you know, it'd be nice to get away, and they've invited me, and I want to go, but it'd be interesting. He's completely blown away. Flies into Uganda, and thousands upon thousands of people line the roads into town wearing silkscreen T-shirts with his face on it, or women having silkscreen dresses with his and Laura's picture on it, singing songs as he comes in with signs saying, God bless the United States of America, thank you for your help. And it's a sign of what can happen if one guy stands up and says, I'm going to use the power and energy of the United States of America to lead the world. And today, there are literally millions of people in Africa who are alive because of what they call the Lazarus effect. They were dying in some village in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly, through first PEPFAR and then the Global AIDS Fund, they've gotten the antiretroviral drugs that allow them to rise up from their deathbeds and live. And that's what American leadership needs to provide in the years ahead.
And it involves doing something.
Doing something. Action. Action.
Thank you.
Thank you, Preston.
That was excellent.